I'll be talking about specifically how do we achieve business and technical agility with Team Topologies, or how does it help achieve that? First, let me introduce myself. Besides being co-author of the book, I'm an independent IT organizational consultant trainer. I've had a number of different roles, have a background in computer science. But yeah, these days, this is what people know me for mostly. So the book came out in late 2019. Luckily, it's been very well received. And so it's been helping many organizations kind of change the way they think about teams, interactions, and how they set up their teams for fast flow. And I think the topic of resilience meets the ideas of the book, in the sense that, as Charles is saying here, Charles Betts from Forrester Research, that we need sort of a new digital operating model. So I won't go into details on that, but effectively, these are sort of, if you like, kind of some foundations that we provide in the book in terms of how to think about teams and responsibilities and interactions in a quite different way from most traditional organizations. So this is the agenda for this talk. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what is business agility, what does it mean to be agile, not just doing agile as a set of ceremonies, and what is the value of product mindset, and then we end up with one or two examples. So Team Topologies helps with business and technical agility, and therefore helping with organizations being more resilient, more resistant to problems and changes in the environment. First, by decoupling business concepts, so that this helps the organization be more responsive. The patterns in Team Topologies help to move away from blocking compliance checks and controls towards self-service, flow-aligned, API-driven checks. Team Topologies is also partially a sense-making approach, so helping organizations gain situational awareness and therefore agility. So being more aware of the environment that's both surrounds us outside as well as inside the organization, inside the teams, etc. And finally, it helps the organization to focus much more tightly on its core mission, understand what are the core mission via streams of work, identifying what the streams are, and limiting team cognitive load, so that teams can actually increase their capability, their delivery, their response to change in a sustainable way. So quickly, what is business agility? What do I mean when I say that? Because it's kind of an overloaded term as well as many others. So we're talking about the ability to respond very rapidly to changing internal and external conditions. So we're talking about doing this in a matter of hours, right? So not weeks or months. So when you look at metrics for high-performing organizations, if you're familiar, for example, with the State of DevOps reports that come out every year, you see that those teams are able to deliver changes in less than an hour. Obviously, small changes, but we have the capability to look at a pressing need from a customer or a problem, and to actually deliver and deploy a change to our software, to our systems in under an hour. So that's very powerful. And really that should be, or for us, that's kind of how we look at business agility, having that capability. And why do we need business agility is also because it supports the remote first kind of world we're in right now, and for the foreseeable future, or a hybrid, but definitely where remote is much more preeminent. It supports changing at speed around technology changes, climate, geopolitical, all these things that are changing in sort of the environment outside the organization. But also adapting to and moving along with increased global and local competition. So we should be striving for business agility, but this is not just about repeating another buzzword, right? Digital transformation, DevOps, business agility. Okay, what does it mean in practice? It should be helping us to answer some questions. It should be helping us to understand how do we optimize for a fast flow of change. Where are we kind of slow, and how do we optimize? How do we make sure we're focusing on the right user needs? So obviously, Jeff's talk went into, gave a lot of amazing insights on this. But so our journey should be helping us understand better, focus on the user needs. And how do we produce the right thing in the right way at the right time, right? So build the right thing in the right way. And also very importantly, how do we adjust? How do we course correct when things, we identify that there are problems, that we are not producing the right things, we are not, teams are not interacting in a way that is productive for the organization, and so on. And how do we maximize our changes of finding new opportunities for innovation, right? So if we have a fast speed of delivery, it's not just, churning out features very quickly or, new functionality. It's also, and perhaps even more importantly, having a very fast feedback loop, right? And getting the information on, what works, what doesn't, and also what are new opportunities for innovation that we might want and the organization might want to pursue. So that said, about business agility, we want organizations, or we want our teams to be agile, not just doing agile in the sense of following some framework or following some set of ceremonies, but actually, how are we, being agile? And so again, I mentioned already the State of DevOps reports that came out every year, and they provide an independent view into the practices and capabilities that drive high performance. And so it provides insights on what are the practices, technical practices in particular, that help, but also cultural practices that help teams and organizations become high performing, and also 4 key metrics that have now been sort of widely understood and adopted, which really help us kind of see if we're going in the right direction. Obviously, we're looking at trends and not, exact numbers. We're not comparing teams, but we're looking at trends and seeing if we're improving along these 4 key metrics. I won't go through all the technical practices, but just to highlight that, these are now kind of well known. We've been able to, through this research, Dr. Nicole Forsgren, Jez Humble, and Jim Kim have been able to really identify a connection between these technical practices and high-performing teams. And then we have the key metrics, right? Lead time, deployment frequency, mean time to restore, change fail percentage. So high-performing teams do very well along these 4 metrics compared to mid or low-performing teams. So there are a number of things we need to have in place to kind of be agile. Obviously, we're looking at fast feedback via deployment pipelines, that they are kind of the backbone for quick delivery. We need good technical practices like the ones that were in that slide, but also TDD, pairing, rich telemetry, etc. So that needs to be in place, obviously. We need teams to have more ownership of their own services. So it's sort of thinking about team-first approach to software architecture, team-first approach to things like training, hiring, all these things. We should be thinking about the needs of teams and providing also autonomy to teams to make the right decisions, rather than kind of impose top-down decisions on all the teams and treating all the teams the same way. That's not going to help them be agile, right? Sending all the teams on Scrum training and certification and then saying we're all working exactly in the same way, that's not going to be agile, sorry. Version control, I'm sorry to have to bring this up still, but it's still something that a fundamental that not every organization or not every team in software and operations uses yet, but it's a fundamental idea that we can understand the version of our code. We have control over what is it that we're using, what is in production, etc. And obviously all the cloud native aspects that help with transparency in operations, increasing the operability, observability of our systems. That's all, sort of, I would say almost fundamental these days. Because without it, you're not going to achieve fast flow, you're not going to achieve sort of technical agility if you don't have an easy way to observe your software, your services, and quickly understand what are some potential problems, how do I diagnose issues, etc. But also learning about how users are consuming your software, what are the patterns, what are the things that the information, feedback we're getting from the live systems. And obviously, cloud native is designed for automation. So we know we need also automation to go quickly. But we need to look also at the architecture. I mentioned that already briefly. Things like domain-driven design can be very helpful if we have sort of tangling of business concepts, kind of mixed the usual monolith or multiple monoliths. So we need to understand what are the business concepts underneath this kind of monolithic software. How do we kind of decouple at the right place? So we call these fracture planes in Team Topologies, but really domain-driven design helps you go into much more depth into how to do this. And then things like Wordly maps, maybe many of you have heard about it or are familiar with it. They help us increase situational awareness and think about the right techniques and the right kind of life cycle for different services that we have in the organization versus, when should we build ourselves, when should we buy, and what are the things that maybe we've built in the past, but now might be moving at a certain point to become an utility. And so we should not be continuing to build, and we should look at using this as a third party. But generally thinking strategically about our customers, about our services and systems we have, and how they're gonna, how we expect them to evolve over time, so we can make the right decisions in terms of their evolution and the effort we put into them. And then Team Topologies, everything around, how do we focus on fast flow, get rapid feedback, what kind of interactions should we have between teams? How do we help teams kind of have a better way to define their interaction, understand their interactions with other teams in the organization, and how do we evolve the organization, and how do we manage cognitive load and limit cognitive load so that teams are not overloaded with too much software, too many responsibilities, which definitely is going to slow them down. So with Team Topologies specifically, the two key goals are to achieve rapid flow of change and rapid feedback from running systems so that we can adapt and make the right decisions. And there are many obstacles to fast flow, but one of the main ones is when we have many handovers in the life cycle, right? We have silo teams, if you like, functional oriented teams, each doing their own bit of the life cycle. But the more handovers we have, the slower we're going to be at delivering, at getting feedback, and adapting and course correcting. So we propose to have what we call Streamline Teams, which, if you like, are very similar to product teams. There are a few reasons why we call them Streamline Teams, but we can talk about that in the Q&A. But effectively, a cross-functional team with end-to-end ownership over a service that fits their capacity, right? And so this team will be in the right place to get quickly feedback from live systems, running systems, and from customer usage, and bring that into the next iterations of the service. So we can very quickly adjust and adapt to needs. And then besides Streamline Team, there are three other types of teams that we talk about. Enabling teams, complicated subsystem teams, and platform teams. So I won't go into details, but effectively these other three types of teams exist to reduce and control, in a way, minimize the cognitive load on the Streamline team. So this sort of approach, obviously, we're talking about a lot of skills, a lot of capabilities, tools, and things that this team is going to need to be able to own their life cycle, the end-to-end service ownership. And so they're going to need help, right, around gaining capabilities that they are maybe lagging behind, providing services that help them do their work more efficiently, not having to worry about all the details around things like tooling, infrastructure, etc. And then very importantly, it's not just about types of teams, because the teams in isolation are not going to achieve the sort of goals and the systems that we need to build today. for our customers. And so we need to understand what are the right interactions, or, I would say the how to frame the interactions in a way that help us understand what are we trying to achieve. Are we going, in the right direction with this interaction between teams? And so we have collaboration, acts as a service, and facilitation. So very quickly, collaboration, two teams working together for a period of time to solve some problem or understand how should it be the design of a certain service or feature. Acts as a service is very much like infrastructure as a service, for example, where one organization, in this case, maybe internally, one team provides a service for other teams to consume. And you should have a high kind of user experience in that service. And facilitating is mostly when one team is helping another team upskill and gain some new capabilities that they are lacking and that they need to do their work. So with this kind of pieces in place, these sort of patterns, we can start having this sort of view of, in this case, a small part of the organization, but we start to see what type of teams exist, what are they trying to achieve, what are the interactions happening right now and why, and what do we think we need next in the near future. Very important for fast flow, we need to track dependencies and separate blocking from non-blocking dependencies. This is a common problem in many organizations, even those that are agile, trying to be agile. So blocking means we have to stop the work we're doing and wait for another team, maybe the infrastructure team or the compliance team or any other team to do some part of the work so that we can then continue. And non-blocking is where we can self-serve, or we can have the necessary capabilities to do the work ourselves, at least kind of the common workflows that we usually need to do. So this is important to understand so that we can actually remove the barriers, the obstacles to flow. So handoffs, I mentioned earlier, approval gates, manual inspections, these are all blocking dependencies, right? It means we have to stop. We maybe start working on something else if we're kind of the development team or Streamline team. And so this increases work in progress. We don't get things actually in the hands of customers quickly, and it just creates a lot of problems besides slowing us down. So we want to replace this as much as possible with self-service APIs. So sort of embed the knowledge and the things, the controls in a way that is consumable via self-service APIs ideally. So it's sort of a shift in mindset, especially around compliance, from kind of what we permit teams to do to what we enable teams to do, right? It's not easy and it's going to take time, but if we want to get compliance at scale, if you like, it doesn't work by having one team like control the work of others, right? Self-service is really the only scalable approach and also cost effective. So we need to think, what do we need to have in place to remain compliant with whatever regulations we have when we have multiple decoupled rapid flows of change and therefore rapid delivery by different teams in a kind of loosely coupled system. And really, looking to that sort of image again, we want to achieve something like this, where compliance as code and sort of some sort of services in a kind of platform that helps Streamline teams kind of self-serve and check their own compliance of their services, and then have the experts kind of raise the skills level of the teams around compliance as well, around other areas, obviously. But in this case, having them kind of work together and pair with different teams to kind of help them understand better, how does this impact us? What is the, what are the regulations in our industry, in our business, etc. So we talked about business agility. We talked about what it means to be agile, not just doing agile. And also we need this product mindset. Usually most organizations are producing products or services for customers, right? And that's how they generate revenue. And so we adapt quickly to the needs of customers. So this means we need a product mindset. So if we're trying to achieve business agility and resilience as well, and we're thinking about only, about projects, and Jeff talked about this in the keynote as well. If we're only focused on projects, we're not going to have the sort of right mindset to evolve products and services very quickly. according to customer needs. So Mark Kagan, who is very aligned with the ideas in Team Topologies as well, in his latest book, Empowered, he mentions Team Topologies as a good way to think about teams interactions. Obviously, he's known for his product focus and books. And so he's talking about product as a holistic user experience, right? It's more about the experience and meeting the user needs than it is about a specific set of functionality. So it's in fact this mix of functionality, design, monetization, and content. We can't really separate these things and say we're not product focused if we're just focusing on functionality, or if we just focus on design or any of the other things, right? And if you think about a product, one of the key things is that optional, right? If I go to a sneaker store, I'm not forced to buy them. I can buy them if I really like a model. So no one is forced to use a product. That's one key thing we need to understand. So we need to if we're working on products for external customers, how do we drive up the engagement with the product by meeting the customer needs, both functionally and design wise, and also product should be carefully designed and curated and fit the needs of our customers. And finally, a product should be making something simpler. Even Jukebox had a pretty cool design. It made it simple for someone to play a certain song and not have to carry around vinyls or whatever. And so a product simplifies something for the users, and we should keep this in mind. It shouldn't make things more complicated for users, which it sometimes does, unfortunately. And so a product also is evolving along technology changes. So we want to take advantage of what technology is providing, right? If we're kind of stuck with certain technology forever and we don't have any kind of prediction on moving to some new technology that it provides us more value, then we're going to get stuck. We won't be that agile. Products need a strong focus on user needs, right? If we start with user needs, we're going to find, or we're going to be more likely to be successful at finding what is the good software, what is the good design that actually is going to help customers do their work. And so we should think about this also internally in the organization, not just for end customers, obviously, but also internally. How do we focus on the needs of developers? How do we focus on the needs of testers, of the people who are doing support for our products, and so on? So this is a general applicable idea and approach that we need for kind of fast flow and in modern software systems. We need to think about the different users also internally in the organization. And effectively, a good way to measure this, if you like, software should get out of the way. We need to design for usability and for reduced cognitive load, both on our end customers as well as internally in our teams. How do we make it easier, simpler to use a product, achieve some outcome, or get some job done without kind of overloading our brains with too much information, too much context to be able to do something? I wanted to get also to this point around products, specifically internally. Many organizations have internal platforms these days, and what we see with clients and often that are asking for help is that these internal platforms don't have a product approach yet. And so we see a lot of gaps in terms of understanding and focusing on product management inside internal platforms. Because if we don't have that, then we don't have this sort of focus on user needs usually. And we're not designing the software in the right way for our internal teams. We might be building out a wonderful platform that does all sorts of things, but we didn't really focus on, does this help the internal teams get their job done in an easier way, faster way? Again, it shouldn't be mandatory, internal platform. If it's a product, we shouldn't be forcing our teams to use it. It drives sort of the wrong incentives if we force teams to use our internal platform. It decreases significantly the need to focus on usability, the need to focus on meeting the needs of the customers if we're mandating people to use the platform because they have no option. In the worst case scenarios, we might even be making it more difficult to use a certain technology compared to if the team would use directly a third party providing that technology, right? That happens. And so that means we have the wrong incentives in place, and we're not really focusing on what does the internal teams need and how do we provide differentiation inside the platform, right? We make things easier through this internal platform. If we're just kind of making external, third-party technology available, but we don't provide better abstractions or we don't simplify the use of this technology, then what is really the point of having it internally in the platform, right? And so we like to say a platform should be a curated experience for engineers, the customers of the platform, right? We sort of wish we had put this definition in the book. It kind of came to us afterwards that actually what they're doing is this curated experience, providing differentiated options for internal teams compared to, if they're just using third parties directly. Obviously, we build internal platform on top of third parties. We're not expecting to internally build a new Kubernetes framework or what have you. That's absolutely not the case. We need to leverage as much as possible what's available outside, but we make it easier to consume internally. So getting to the last part, what I wanted to show you quickly, I think we have time for a couple of examples on how different organizations have been applying the patterns from Team Topologies to increase their business agility, to increase their flow and their ability to adapt quickly. So we had a number of case studies, or we have a number of case studies in the book, in the Team Topologies book that I have here. Adidas, OutSystems, Uswitch, IBM, etc. So because the book wasn't out yet, these are kind of case studies of specific patterns, right, that were working for those organizations. And now we have seen, we can't count anymore how many organizations have adopted the ideas in Team Topologies. Some go more in depth, like even organizations applying the ideas that for all the teams internally, not just technology, even marketing and sales, etc. That's kind of one extreme we've seen, which is great. I think there will be more coming on that. And then other organizations just starting with some of the patterns that are more useful for them, typically understanding cognitive load on teams and how to minimize it, understanding different types of teams, understanding or using maybe the team API idea, and so on. So what we've done is we publish these examples, obviously the ones we have permission on our teamtopologies.com website. So there are a number of new examples, quite interesting ones. So have a look at that. We've also worked with more organizations. Actually, the examples mostly, we didn't work with those organizations. They came to us and said, hey, we've done this and what do you think about it? We're like, okay, it's pretty good. We should publish that. We've worked with many organizations. I'm not going to go through this list, but basically what I'm trying to say here is that it really seems to apply across any kind of industry. There's government, telecom, banking, etc. And also at sort of any kind of scale, because maybe not all of the patterns will be applicable to a startup or a scale up, but they mostly apply to any kind of scale organization. So the first example or case study I want to talk about is Food Asylum. This is a company founded in about 16 years ago. They grew a lot in these 15 years in the UK. They have 2,500 employees, and basically they grew up to a point where they had those dreaded monoliths, and they were kind of slowing down their ability to change and adapt to new needs. What happened was they have a lot of, as they grew, they got more teams across multiple regions, and they were trying to organize in a way that making use of teams across the world, but they had a lot of kind of dependencies between all these different areas, all these different teams, and they had the product managers were sort of becoming project managers effectively. They were kind of managing projects, coordination between all these different teams. So this wasn't working very well for them, and they realized, and the book came out or was kind of in pre-sales around the time that they were facing these sort of problems. And so what they did was focus on streams of work. What are the actual loosely coupled streams of work that we have in the organization? And once they figured that out, they could align the sort of streamline teams to those services, right? And make those evolve more independently. They also had services team, sort of platform team, providing some lower level services that most streamline teams needed to use. Interestingly, they combined this with Wordly mapping. So that means they looked at how, the different services we have, how do we expect them to evolve over time? Obviously, I can't go into a lot of detail on Wordly mapping here, but I strongly recommend having a look and following Simon Wardley. Is quite funny on Twitter. But so they were thinking about, okay, what we have now, is this a custom product? Is this something we expect in the future to become more of a utility, or we even sometimes internally something that was owned by a streamline team that we think is going to, not have any changes anymore, and so it's going to become part of a platform service instead. And other ideas that they adopted was the thinnest viable platform that we talk about in the book. So when we're building this internal platform, again, we focus on the users and we focus on what is the minimum, the smallest set of services, APIs, and tools that are really helpful internally, rather than trying to build everything that we could possibly build in theory. And so they had a cool example where they needed a directory of locations of physical stores. So, right, so they sell, they have sports equipment stores. And so they thought, well, we need a certain location service with a database and so on. And then they thought, well, wait a second, how often does this change? And it doesn't change very often how many physical stores they have. So instead, they just had a static data file, version controlled, and that was enough for the needs of the team. So this is a very good example of a thinnest viable platform. What is the smallest thing that can work, that can help our teams without increasing unnecessarily the complexity of the platform? And using the team topologies, the types of teams and interactions really help them increase the clarity of what teams they have, what are they trying to achieve, when they should interact, and how. And so the streamlined focus on business domains, understanding what those domains are, and how are they what are the ones that are kind of decoupled from each other mostly. Thinnest viable platform, evolving teams interactions, and combining with Wordly mapping are some of the key ideas from this example. So thank you to Paul Martin and Andy Norton for sharing this with us. There's another example from USwitch. I'll go quickly. I think I have a couple of minutes. So UK Switch is a comparison service in the UK to, you can compare internet providers, electricity providers, etc. The interesting thing is that they had this model already since about like 10 years ago, where they actually had streamlined teams with kind of sort of full autonomy to make all sorts of decisions. The thing there is that they didn't really have platforms. And so they were looking at, they strongly use, AWS services, and they were seeing that there were more and more services being used, more and more API calls to AWS from the different teams. So each team set up their own environment, set up their own AWS needs. And they actually realized this is kind of a proxy for cognitive load. It means all these teams have to worry about a lot of the low-level details around how do these services work, what is the right configuration, how do we manage, scalability, all these sort of aspects. And so this is what Paul Ingalls said at the time, or a few years ago. People are spending a lot of time interacting with low-level services, and therefore spending their time, their precious time, on low-value decisions when we think about the overall, needs of customers and focus on customers. So they introduced an infrastructure platform. This was quite successful. They started with one team that was going to use some service, right? They didn't set out to build the the platform that fits all the needs of all the teams in the organization. They start with one team and then they evolved over time, the platform. But it's pretty cool because then they saw sort of drop in the direct calls to AWS from the team services as they started using the internal platform, right? So the drop means they were now using internal services from the platform, but the platform was never mandated. Teams had the option to sort of buy into the platform when they saw that it actually makes our life easier. Anyway, they've evolved over time and now they have more platforms. And so it looks a bit more like this. So platforms around data, even sort of marketing services. So it's a pretty cool example as well. I wrote about, talking about Kubernetes because that's what they use that internally in the platform as foundation. I have an article that's out on InfoQ about that as well. So they had this idea of curated platform experience, reducing complexity for teams. Effectively, teams were overloaded with complexity and they needed to go faster. So thank you to Paul Ingalls, Tom Booth for providing this. And just to sum up, I know Ronnie probably wants to get to the questions. The idea is to respond rapidly to changing external internal conditions. That's what we're trying to achieve with business agility, and Team Topologies helps achieve business agility. We want to increase the awareness that we have, the clarity of business purpose, understand what are the technical practices we need to have in place, and allow teams to do more localized decisions that fit the needs of the customers of their services, and focus on user needs, user experience, etc. We looked at a couple of examples, and this is, I won't read this again, but it's effectively what we saw in the beginning. This is the ways in which Team Topologies helps with business agility. I have some slides. I think the slides will be made available with resources, infographics. We just launched this week our academy, where we have we'll be publishing on-demand courses, and you can sign up for tips at teamtopologies.com. That's it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Manuel. This was really great. I know that Team Topologies was recently adopted also into the Scaled Agile Framework, SAFe version 5.1, and I've already had the pleasure of having that in the recent SAFe for Teams course that I led, and I felt like these patterns of the Team Topologies really helped create these aha moments, like all these patterns that we see, but now they have a really more clarity around them. So we do have a few questions. We won't have time for all of them. So I want to encourage everybody who maybe has not had their question answered to join Manuel in the Zoom room right after, but let's try to pick like one or two. So we had one question about how do you deal with the customer support team and handling customer issues in this kind of situation where you are having the various team topologies?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So obviously it depends a bit on the scale we're talking about and the life cycle of the product. So if you're starting a new service, a new product, I would actually encourage that the Streamline team actually is dealing with support initially. Obviously, it's not going to scale. And ideally, if the product or service is successful, you're going to need to have other sort of structures in place. But why not start with the team so that they get really as fast as possible feedback on, how is this helping or not. But obviously, at certain scale, you need maybe to have first line of support. You also probably need, if you have a large scale and you have products and services that are related to each other, and you have your customers use multiple services and they expect kind of some coherency in terms of the usability of these different services, etc. You might need what we call in the book a service experience team, a team that maybe is not actually building software, but is actually looking at how do we provide a better experience across services to our customers. But even if you don't have those sort of teams, again, if we're looking for rapid feedback, that includes, and definitely we should be looking at what are the problems customers are having using our software. And if that comes to another team in support, we should be thinking about how do we set up some mechanisms so that information is not lost in support, if you like. And so maybe you have someone from the team who is actually working with the support team on a rotating basis. Maybe you have something with some people call swarming on issues. So when there's an issue in production, maybe you don't really know what is the cause. Maybe we need to get people from different teams to go in and swarm over this issue and kind of help deal with it. So think about, there are different ways. So think about what is going to help the Streamline teams get feedback as quickly as possible, also on the support side, on the problems customers are facing. And when you see repeated patterns of problems, then obviously that's something we need to think about. How do we then provide a better solution and not just work around every time the customer hits this problem?